Welcome to this episode of the PA System. On this episode, I'm talking with Shameka Allen-Lane, 15-year veteran in the event planning space, and she's going to be sharing her best tips for how to run a successful event in 2023. So welcome to the show, Shameka.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So great to have you. So I'm excited because you and I have talked quite a bit in the past, and obviously you have a lot of experience planning events. And now that the world is opening back up a little bit and we get to have fun with events and get-togethers and happy hours and all the things, you are going to tell us how to do that the right way.
Yes, yeah.
And we were just talking before we came on about how there can be glitches and things that are unexpected that come up. I recently did an event of my own, and when I got there, they really weren't ready for me, and that was interesting. So, there's just these things along the way that I think, it's important for us to know how to approach maybe a little bit more in advance so that that doesn't happen or other little glitches don't happen. So just kind of talk to us about the very, basic things we need to know when we're planning an event.
Okay. Well, first, I have to tell you, I actually came up with a framework for it. And so my background is in chemistry, and in my background, it's almost like a periodic table since my background is from chemistry, but it actually groups together like there's families on the periodic table. So there's 5 main pillars that I love to use with my clients to kind of help guide them through almost like a checklist to cover all of these different things, like you said, so there are no glitches. So I would say number 1, it's goals and objectives, just always making sure that you know what those goals and objectives are for that event, and you're creating metrics around those specific goals and objectives so that once everything is over, you can look back to that, as well as along the way as you're planning things out, looking to see, is it meeting those goals and objectives, so you don't have that shiny object syndrome, right? And then number 2, financial management is the second pillar. And that's just making sure that you're considering all ways that you can make revenue, any stream of revenue that is coming in for your event. You're considering those things, as well as considering cash flow, so that if you do have sponsorships coming through, you're not at a deficit at any point as you're going through your expenses and things like your budgeting. All of that is inclusive in that financial management. And then, of course, we go into what I like to call my sweet spot is logistics. So some of what you mentioned, Pamela, falls up under that logistics area. It's getting all those details together for the planning of the actual event. So making sure everything is planned, ready to go. And then the day of, and when you're on site, that's the execution. That's the 4th pillar. And then the 5th pillar is actually evaluation. You never want to skip that step. I feel like a lot of people miss that step, but evaluation is very essential because you want to look at everything you've done, especially if this is an event that you look to continue and have on a regular basis, whether it's annually, monthly, quarterly, whatever that looks like for you. You want to go ahead and look at the full evaluation. And that's going to obviously cover your metrics. But in addition to your metrics, you want to also look at everything from feedback that you've received on site. You want to look at your surveys. You want to consider all of your stakeholders. You want to look at social media metrics, your media. You want to consider all things depending on what size your event is so that you can compare apples to apples each time you have that event.
I love this. Okay, so this makes it so straightforward too. And for me, that's super helpful. Like if somebody goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's what you need to know. Now let's break it down. That is like, you are speaking my language. So let's just kind of talk about number 1 a little bit. This idea of you need to know what direction you're headed in. How do we kind of kickstart that process? What do we need to be thinking about before we ever even really start planning the event?
Sure. So every time you have an event or you're considering an event, you automatically have something in mind. There's always a purpose, right? And so sometimes I joke about even birthdays. People will like, for my birthday, I want to do XYZ. And so sometimes we think the birthday is the reason, and maybe it is. But if we use the example of the birthday, a lot of times that's not the real reason people are using it. It's an excuse. They're using it as an excuse. The real reason they're looking to have that event is that they want to gather with people. They want to have a good time. There are other things that go behind what their real reason is. So you want to explore that. You want to explore why you want to make this happen, what's important to you, and just kind of go from there with saying, okay, this is what's most important, because this is going to help build everything out as you go along in the process. If you're very clear to yourself of, this is why I want to have this to happen, and this is why it's important to me.
So, and I think this is so, so important, because often now in the business space, people are planning events around their business, and they may not be especially clear on what their goal is for that event. They may have an objective, they may have a goal, but they haven't really defined it. They don't know really, what that means, or what it looks like, or how to get there. So how do they really start to take a look at that and figure out what that is?
So I will tell you, this for some people is one of the most painful parts of the process, because there's a lot of pulling, because I think people don't want to admit to themselves, or don't even realize that they don't know the actual reason that they're doing these different things, right? To have an event just because you want to have a good time, I'm not saying anything's wrong with that, but it has to have more meat to it to know where you're going, right? Because at the end of the day, you want to have something to show for your efforts, be it finances, be it time, whatever that looks like for you. You want to have something to show for it. So what you want to do is actually explore what's needed, right? If you have certain areas that you have a need in, so sometimes it's doing something simple. I'll give you an example. I had a client that was doing a excuse me, a grand opening, and they're actually opening a brick and mortar location. Before, they were completely virtual, and obviously you want to have an event to let everyone know that, but they were like, okay, this is our time to shine. We need to build awareness around our business, not just that we have a brick and mortar, but we want to actually let others know that we are here. These are the different types of services that we offer. This is who we've worked with in the past. So they built all of that. I work with them to build all of that inside of their actual event, so that everything has an intention. So when you're looking at even your marketing efforts, when you're going through your budget, deciding what you can afford and what you cannot, or what's important, we're looking at each one of those intentions along the way to see exactly what makes sense for your business. So you have to dig deeper. If you know that you have a feeling of something, you want to go ahead and start writing down all those things that you're interested in, all those things that you feel like, this is kind of why I want to do this, and start seeing if there are common denominators. And most times there are. It may be because you want exposure. It may be that you want to build connection and do some networking, but getting to the core of that, but writing all of those things down and taking a step back to look at that. And of course, sometimes you need help. And if you do, you can reach out to people like myself. You may have a coach that you work with already, maybe a part of a mastermind group. If you kind of take a step back from it sometimes and let people know what you have come up with, they can kind of help guide you through the process of saying, okay, this sounds like a common denominator is X, and that's going to be one of your main objectives for that event.
That is so helpful, because it's one thing to have goals and objectives in your business, and it's another thing to have them for an event. Can you talk about kind of the differences between those two?
Sure. And a lot of times, of course, they're going to go kind of overlap with each other. Excuse me. But having goals and objectives in your business, they're not going to always exactly line up with what you're doing for an event. So with an event, you want to have a specific purpose. with your business, you might have 2 or 3 different goals. And in those 2 or 3 different goals, they may have long time periods to go along with them. Some of them are things that you can do this month, some are 6 months, some are 5 years and longer, right? And so when you're doing an event, that's not the case. The event has a finite date attached to it. And whatever that event date is, that's your actual date that you're trying to build around. And so you need something that can give you very tangible results in that time frame. And so those are the metrics that we're looking at when we're talking about goals and objectives. We want to be very clear about what our expectation is. So if we have a percentage that we're looking at that we want to convert, if we have a certain amount of people we want to attend to give exposure to something, if we're wanting to raise a certain amount of dollars, we want to have very specific things. But even beyond that, I have clients and other events that I work with where, they may have diversity things that they're looking to make sure is happening at their event because they want to be a reflection of that. So those are part of things that they add into their goals and objectives that may or may not be in your business goals and objectives because you handle things a little bit differently. So it's about how you want to come across to individuals as well that you're bringing into you. And you have to just kind of realize, why are you bringing them to you? So are you bringing them to show them about a new service? Or are you just giving them exposure? Are you just looking to serve your community? So these are all things that are specific to that event, as opposed to in your business. There are multiple goals that overlap, and some of them have various time frames. With an event, it is very specific of that time frame, and that's what you're working with.
That's such a great breakdown. And to me, that really helps simplify the process, because when you can look at it from a little bit more strategic standpoint, then like you said, you have a better sense of what you're doing as you're planning the event even. Right? So talk to us a little bit about that. Just give us an example maybe of how that plays out when you're actually planning an event.
Sure. So with planning an event and you have those goals and objectives, there are so many times, and me and my husband kind of joke about this a little bit, with all of those pillars that I gave in the beginning. I talk about how pillar 1, goals and objectives, and pillar 2, financial management, are hand in hand, right? It's kind of like box 1, box 2, and you have to beat both boxes to keep going to box 3, right? And so what that looks like is, if there is someone or a trend that is popular, maybe someone that is like part of pop culture right now, and people say, oh my goodness, I would love to have them at my event. I know that this will bring so many people. Well, if that doesn't align with your goals and objectives, if that person is not someone that's directly influencing the type of goals and objectives that you've already set forth with your event, or some other trend that may be happening in events that is really cool and everybody's doing it at every event, if that doesn't align with your goals and objectives, then we can stop right there. That's part of that shiny object syndrome. If, for instance, it does line up with your goals and objectives, you go to pillar 2, which is financial management. If it is not in the reading for the financial management, for instance, you can afford that with your budget, or maybe you just don't have the cash flow to go ahead and meet them on their terms and you can't get that negotiated, then if you're not meeting point 1 and 2, then we can't pass go. We can't move forward like we would do in Monopoly. We're not going to get to step 3. We just need to halt right there. We need to find those things that make sense to meet 1 and 2 before you can go forward.
You know what? That makes so much sense to me. And it's almost humorous, because I literally was watching an episode of Shark Tank recently. And it was interesting because this man came with what I felt was, a relatively inventive idea. But he brought on as a spokesperson Seth Rogen, who, of course, is hilarious. And I mean, who wouldn't love to engage with him? But the thing of it was, he really couldn't speak for the product because he didn't actually use the product. And so it was like there was such a big mismatch that it actually sort of had a counter effective effect. You
Exactly.
know, because it was like, wait, this is your spokesman, but he's not actually using the product, right?
Right, right. And that's exactly what it does, And I work with a lot of nonprofits as well. And in the nonprofit space, if you have something that doesn't align with your mission, it's a complete miss. So you really want to make sure that it makes sense and it aligns with what you're doing.
That's so good. Well, I think that this is really going to give people a lot of clarity around, just even what they need to be thinking about before they plan an event. But I know that you have a lot more information that you can share with people about how to actually walk through those steps and make that happen if they are planning events, especially if they're doing them consistently or if they're planning online events. So tell us just a little bit about how the process is different, if at all, for online events.
Sure, for online events, it is a little bit different. I will say right now, in complete transparency, I think that online events are taking a little bit of a dive.
Mm,
Not a ton, but we know for the past few years, sometimes we had no choice but to do online events. So some people are really yearning for that personal, in-person touch type of situation. But we do believe that it's not going to completely go away, and we
sure.
do see that. And so many have seen so many benefits to virtual events. The analytics by themselves
Yeah,
are
very
just so
helpful.
worthy.
Yes.
What you learn about your attendees, what you can also provide to your sponsors and that type of thing. So in terms of virtual events, I will say that because you're not going in person, there's a lot more checks that you need to do for technology, because you're also recognizing that your audience may or may not be familiar with this technology. So you want to make it as seamless as possible. So there are more steps that you want to inform your audience. You want to do a lot more testing, and you have to do things like check for lighting and sound and all of these things, where you may have a speaker that is well accomplished and has a lot of experience, but they may not be used to this type of platform. So just prepping
Mm,
them for that.
that's so good. Well, I know that you've got some more resources available for people, and I want them to be able to get access to those. So, where is the best place to connect with you?
Sure. So I will say, if you want more content, the best place to connect is my Facebook group called Event Planning with a Purpose. That is the number one place to reach out to me, because I do talk back and forth with the group members there. So if you want direct information or anything like that, that's the best place to go to get that information. But of course, outside of that, I do have on both Facebook and LinkedIn Catalyst Event Coaching, and there's content there, but not like what you're going to find inside of the group.
Okay, fantastic. So, to find you on Facebook and LinkedIn, it's Shameka Allen-Lane, correct?
Yes, yes.
Okay, yeah. And just for those who are listening and not watching, you will spell that Shameka and then Allen, Allen dash Lane, Lane. So just give us a quick wrap up here. What are your final thoughts before we close this today?
Sure. My final thoughts, I would say, as you're planning your events, do not be distracted by what everyone else is doing. Always stick to your goals and objectives and make them uniquely yours, because once you stick to that, your event is going to stand out and you're going to meet the metrics that you're setting forth to accomplish.
Mm. So good. I'm excited. I feel like all my events going forward are going to be like twice as good.
I hope so. Yes.
Yeah. I'm like, I have got to get over into that group. I'm telling you that right now. Well, thank you so much for being here, Shameka. This was so much fun. And I really appreciate you just sharing your wisdom with us. People really need these insights, I think, more than ever right now. I'm sure you are working with a lot of small businesses. And, frankly, everyone is really pushing to, get visibility. And this is one way you can do it. It's maybe not the easiest way, but you can have a lot of fun with it, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you again to all of you out there listening. I appreciate you being with us as always. And if this was helpful for you, then please, by all means, share it out. It might be helpful for someone you know as well. So thank you again for being here, and we'll see you again next time.